Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for joining us on today's webinar, which is Reigniting Employee Motivation to Drive Innovation in Your Workforce. I'm Claude Werder. I'm a principal analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, and I'll be kicking things off for us today. And let's start by introducing my co-presenter today, Samer Saab, founder and CEO of Explorance. Thank you for joining us, Samer.
Thank you for having me, Claude.
Samer is a globally recognized leader in people insights leveraged by organizations to collect and analyze workforce feedback and evaluations. Beyond machine learning and big data tech, Samer is passionate about helping organizations focus on where people's experiences converge with talent effectiveness to achieve business agility and support the professional journey of purpose, growth, and impact of their employees and students. Samer continues to lead Explorance following 20 years of responsible growth and innovation. We greatly appreciate Explorance's sponsorship of today's webinar. Founded in 2003, Explorance supports more than 20 million people in their individual journeys of purpose, growth, and impact. As a leading provider of people insight solutions, Explorance empowers organizations with actionable decision-making by measuring students' and employees' needs, expectations, skills, knowledge, and competencies. Explorance facilitates continuous improvement and accelerates the insight to action cycle, leading to personal growth and organizational agility. Headquartered in Montreal with business units in Chicago, Chennai, Melbourne, Amman, and London, Explorance works with 25% of the Fortune 100 and 25% of the top higher education institutions, including 8 of the world's top 10 business schools. The company has clients in more than 50 countries. But for those of you who aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we're a human capital management research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. Just a quick mention that we currently have several certification programs open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist and Certified Talent Management Strategist programs. Visit certification.brandonhall.com to learn more about how to earn that designation. Your participation in our surveys is one of the most crucial components for our research. If you have just a few minutes to spare and see any topics here that you can take a survey for, it would be greatly appreciated. Links will be available in your handout, or you can always visit brandonhall.com. All survey participants receive a complimentary piece of research. And finally, just a few logistics before we get going. To ask questions, we ask that you please use the questions panel on your control bar. I think on most computers, that's going to be toward the bottom. Today's presentation is being recorded, and we will share a link to the recording and a PDF of the presentation via email in roughly 24 hours. If you would like to download a copy of today's presentation right away, the link to the PDF of the slides will be available in just a few minutes. It'll be in the chat. Chat is also open today, so we invite you to join in on today's discussion. Share your thoughts as we go through. We'll be prompting you to share some ideas with us as we go, or simply just pop in, say hello, and let us know where you're joining from today. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. So first, why are we here? You know, our webinar aims to enable you to be more effective in listening to employees and using insights to take action to improve things like growth opportunities for employees, employee experience, and also to reduce skill gaps. Employee listening is one of those buzzwords that gets bandied about quite a bit. And I listened to a webcast earlier this week that focused on how often employees should be surveyed. They advocated for continuous listening, meaning frequent surveying of employees. We're not going to be talking about continuous listening today because we believe that can be really counterproductive. We're going to focus on effective listening that drives organizations to take action that can reignite innovation and motivation. Employee listening, in my mind, and I think Samer agrees, is a means to an end. You listen to gain insights that drive actions to improve your organization. And without that action, that drives widespread improvements, listening to employees is, really just another exercise that you put your employees through with little benefit to them or the organization. So employers are understandably concerned about the volatility their organizations or their employees face on a daily basis. We all know that the world of work is full of change, from adjustment to hybrid work to the volatile economy. Many of us are facing some layoffs now. Lot to do, there's a lot to do, so many priorities to manage, so much change going on. And so employers and HR teams struggle to identify priorities and take the steps needed to address challenges in a meaningful way. So our research shows on the slide that retaining talent is the biggest concern, followed closely by attracting the right people, which is part of the reason that listening to employees to glean insights has become so important. But having the right technology, which 49% of organizations say is important, having that is also among the top concerns because technology can create efficiencies and enable greater insights, more strategic action without as much wear and tear on people. So our research shows that 77% of organizations believe employee engagement is the top people-focused issue to address this year. But there is sometimes confusion about what employee engagement is. On this webcast I listened to, I was a little surprised to hear one presenter linking employee engagement to the level of employee participation in surveys. I think that's kind of an old-fashioned view. We at Brand Hall Group, and I know Sammer and Explorance agree, employee engagement is an outcome based on how employees experience the organization. When employees experience opportunities for, say, career growth, meaningful work, and also when they have strong relationships with their managers where they're helping them with their career growth and they're working with them to improve and refine their performance, employee engagement tends to increase. That's just a few examples. That kind of thing can lead to more discretionary effort and a greater sense of belonging and loyalty to the employer. But with all the volatility and change, high levels of engagement are increasingly hard to come by. So before we drill into our topic today, we want to get a sense from all of you on where engagement stands in your organization. So we want to give you just a quick poll, which we'll launch in just a second here. And the question is really simple, right? Just rate the overall level of engagement in your organization. Do you think you're highly engaged? Like you're really world-class in engagement and you have a highly engaged workforce? Moderately engaged? Maybe it varies a little bit by employee level or function or other factors, but you feel pretty good about it. Somewhat engaged, meaning you're kind of getting by, but significant improvements needed. Barely engaged, meaning you're kind of struggling to one degree or another at all levels of the organization, or really not at all engaged, where you've really got a pretty significant problem. So luckily, nobody is dealing with not being at all engaged, and really not many of you, only 2% feel that you're barely engaged. You're kind of in the middle, right? Moderately engaged or somewhat engaged, which is pretty typical. So the great majority of you are in those two buckets. And I think we're going to try to share some information with you today that that will help you take that up a level and improve where you are. So let's move on. So where we are, what our research is showing is only 26% of organizations say their workforce is highly engaged. And so that's actually maybe a little bit better than some of you are experiencing, but not very many organizations is the bottom line, are dealing with a highly engaged workforce. So there's many approaches to improving engagement. And we want to start out by providing an overview of one approach, which Explorance calls People Insight Solutions. So I'll turn it over to Sammer.
Thank you, Claude. So the main notion that we've been looking at and analyzing, considering how the whole world went into how do we make sure our employees are happy, and the primary focus was generally on employee experience. And we've been looking at it and saying, this is great, the experience is a great part of motivating and making sure that an employee feels great. But unless if we succeed to give them everything else around it that makes them be effective in what they do, so they drive impact, it may very fast erode and happiness may change into demotivation. So basically, this is the whole notion of how do you balance skill and will, which is the next slide, please. So the premise behind it is that organizations need to be equally focused on employee experience as they are on employee effectiveness. How able am I, and how willing am I? Ideally, we want willing employees that are able to do the job. If they're unable, how do we get them to become able? And how do we turn the able and unwilling into able and willing as well, which gives us a little bit, a view that's a little bit more multidimensional than a very simplistic employee experience approach. So what that brings us is into the next slide, please, where that brings us into the notion of people insight solution, which is basically an evolution from simplistic employee experience management focus to a more holistic view. And the premise behind that is to question at the beginning what makes for a successful organization or a happy employee. And these are the key drivers. At the beginning, we want to make sure that everybody that's there is fulfilling some sense of purpose. The Great Resignation has proven that many of the employees that left not because they didn't like their manager or the company or what they were doing, it's because they got to step back to be able to reassess whether they were going in the right direction or not to start with. Well-being, we want to make sure that people are feeling well. And diversity. Diversity is not something we can build after the fact. We need to start by it. And diversity is not just a demographic diversity. It's diversity of opinion, diversity of thought, diversity of thinking. And that is the base of that approach. On top of that, we want to build on capability. We want to make sure that the people that we have are actually growing. And you need to be able to have very solid processes in place, whether they're software, services, capability, to be able to ensure you're measuring the skill, the knowledge, the competency base of your employees, and ensure that it's actually the right effort is put in place to ensure that all these are growing in alignment with business needs, in alignment with changes. So it's a very important criteria that should come before that experience or happiness part, because it's very unlikely that one of your customers is going to appreciate talking to a very short-term happy employee that cannot help them, or they would rather talk to an employee that can actually help them. And if that employee is engaged and happy, that's even better. Which brings the next building block that comes, which is the willingness. Now that I'm making sure I have a core of employees that have a sense of purpose, feeling well, diverse set that's being represented, that are able to do and growing, now, on top of it, we're going to add the building block. Can we ensure that their experience across the organizational journey is perfect? Onboarding, recruitment, applicant, exit, and so on. And can we ensure that we are doing the steps that it takes to ensure that they are engaged in it, that they feel included? Because inclusion is critical. It's great to have diverse people, but if we don't make them feel that they are safe and welcome to contribute their ideas, and there's no value in diversity. The importance of diversity is the fact that these rich ideas around the table are coming in. And what that does, it creates team autonomy. It gives a sense of empowerment, and it fosters performance, which is that convergence of experience and effectiveness that drives the ultimate goal of business agility, business success, personal growth, and that increases the sense of purpose. And then the circle continues. So that is in general this theory that we look at. And as we go a little bit more deeper into specifics and examples, I'll pass it back to you, Claude.
Thank you. And so all that Samar was talking about is critical. You know, this approach we think is critical for organizations that want to excel. And just thought we'd share a few of the most important human capital management improvements that organizations are dealing with. And this is according to our survey of business and HR leaders taken at the end of last year. So topping the chart is increasing leaders' ability to manage employees more holistically and inclusively, followed by improving the employee work experience, which you've already touched on. Related to that is reimagining how to motivate employees. Organizations are believing that they're not there, they're not able to do that. So how do they do it differently? Which is why they need more insights so they can take the appropriate action. And then reskilling, of course, of employees is definitely on the minds of most businesses and is at the top of the priority list along with these other things. But the real question, and this is what we want to drill into as we go further today, is not what employers need to do, because probably this data isn't really a surprise to anyone, but how to do it. Understanding the most effective ways to build employee experiences that drive engagement requires understanding what the workforce needs and wants. And it's important to understand the difference between needing and wanting too. I think this is where the process of improving employee experience tends to kind of break down for organizations, because workforces, especially larger organizations, are often dispersed, diverse, working in different cultures, different time zones, different atmospheres, all sorts of differences. So there's not one set of wants and needs. There's many different differentiated sets of concerns and needs that employees have, and they gain value from employment in different ways. So there are no easy answers to understand what employees need. Needing is kind of involving the essentials for doing meaningful work, and then the wanting is more about what's going to make them want to be more loyal to the organization, more committed, have a greater sense of belonging, and to want to stay and grow with the organization. So the difficulty of understanding what employees want and expect from their employment is illustrated by this data point, right? Only 38% of organizations believe they have a strong or excellent understanding. So think about that for a minute. Slightly more than 1 in 3 organizations know what they need to do to improve employee experiences that lead to greater engagement and business success. But it's not for a lack of trying or a lack of asking employees for feedback. Employers use a lot of different methods for understanding what employees value from their employment. They look at engagement surveys annually. Some organizations, about 40%, do more than one. About half, a little less than half, and this surprised me a little bit, leverage ERGs, employee resource groups, to drive key issues. 41%, like I mentioned, use surveys more than once. And interestingly, exit interviews, and particularly stay interviews, which I think are really valuable pieces of qualitative data, are not used very often at all. We hear a lot about frequency of listening to employees as a strategy to gain more insight. But Sam and I are going to focus in a moment on the power of efficiency over frequency. And before we do that, we'd just like to get a sense from all of you, another poll question about what you think about the frequency and what you're doing in your organization on the frequency of collecting employee data. It's always good to have a reference point as we continue to talk. So the question is very straightforward, and we'll launch it for you here. How often do you survey your employees to seek feedback? Is it once or twice a year? Quarterly? Monthly? Weekly? Or daily, or multiple times a week? And the results are coming in. And we'll give you a couple more seconds, but it looks like the majority are once or twice a year. And about 20% are doing it quarterly, and then another 25% are weekly or monthly. Fairly split, but the majority certainly are more focused on once or twice a year. And I think we're going to be talking about that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. The key is to be able to make the best use of that data. So we'll go ahead and move on, and I will turn it over to Samar here in a minute. But first, we want to turn the conversation a little bit about toward how we can be more efficient and effective in collecting data, and more importantly, gain those insights that you really need. And all organizations have particular pain points that they desperately want to reduce, right? But struggle to gain insights to make specific gains. So we just wanted to give you an example of the type of gaps we're talking about. So let's use leadership as an example. So when we ask people about the behaviors present in organizations, about 63% said that leaders value their employees. 51% said leaders promote teamwork and inclusion. So more than half do those things, but then fewer organizations have leaders that are supportive of employees' development activities. And then you go toward the end of the graphic, 26% say that their leaders consistently provide coaching and feedback. So I think you'll agree that this data shows that there are some pretty significant leadership skill gaps in many organizations. Even the bar at the left, it says 63% of leaders value their employees. I mean, that means that what, 37%, almost 40% of organizations don't think their leaders do value their employees. So that's a pretty basic prerequisite of being a good manager. So that's a problem, right? But what makes this even more troublesome, I think, is that we ask about the leadership behaviors in our research every year, and the numbers don't change. They don't get any better. They're about the same. I mean, maybe a sway of a couple percentage points here and there, but they're basically don't change. And most organizations are not making significant gains in bridging the gaps, despite spending significant sums of money every year on leadership development. So that shows, to me anyway, that organizations don't really understand what they need to do to change leadership behaviors in this example, and probably many other behaviors, the way they want to. So they need more insight and understanding to make progress that they want. So Samar, I know you've worked with many organizations that have these kind of issues, so I'll turn it over to you to tell the story.
Perfect, absolutely. So obviously, it doesn't take much to realize what's happening today in the market when we look at the headlines. For example, Google CEO stating that profitability is hiding performance issues. Meta saying they need to flatten the organization and reshuffle the HR, so the management. So they say want to get rid of the management and HR. And you see that there's a lot of movement of saying what happened in our organization. We used to have 2/3 of the workforce we had today to achieve the same output. So there is a struggle, and usually that is a lot of the unblockers of that is typically happen in middle management, which is related to that leadership, these leadership challenges that we're talking about. So an example, I'm going to go into a specific example, then we globalize it. So we were working with a global pharmaceutical organization, and we're working on running a 360-degree feedback, which is usually the tool that is used to be able to measure competency developmental needs of managers or leadership. And most of the time, this tool is used to be able to help identify the individual developmental needs. So you run it for 5,000 of your managers, you get 5,000 reports shared with 5,000 line managers, and every manager is going to go ahead and start improving their baseline. But the way we decided to look at the data was to look at it more at the aggregate level, because as every organization out there, there is a struggle and there's a priority of figuring out how to bring back performance, how do we bring back effectiveness. And when we looked at the data at the aggregate level, it told a very different story. And the story basically, at the end of it, the summary of it is that organization had lost, since COVID started, about 7 years of leadership skill. That's the skill gap. And the main premise behind it is because many organizations lost a lot of their employees and managers during the Great Resignation period. And in desperation, they went and replaced them by promoting internally in fear of losing more people, and also hiring from outside with less scrutiny. I remember one time there was I used to work in McDonald's when I started my career a long time ago. I saw a bus where there was an ad on the top there on the back saying, come and interview us. And I've never thought, I see the day where McDonald's would come and say, come and interview us. So there is something that clicked in that made organization replace people that left and not necessarily the skills that they lost. And that created a major divide in terms of the skills that left with those that left and the lack of skills of those that got promoted versus those that joined recently. So the premise is many organizations are running with that. They feel there is something and they make decisions that are either extreme or not enough. But in general, they're not measured, educated decisions because there are ways today to be able to measure a skill gap. We can either look into previous 360 results, run a 360 now, and be able to look at the difference by doing all these cross analysis of the levers, the stayers, the joiners, and so on. Or we can mine the data that's existing. A lot of mining tools out there that actually allows organizations to come say, this is what it was before COVID started. This is what it is today. And the challenge doesn't stop that. It's important to know how much did we lose? Where did we lose? What is the most important in terms of the skills that we've lost? And then how do you go about accelerating the recovery from that gap? Because it's pretty dangerous for organizations. And the premise, usually you already have your formal programs, you have the work on the learning on the job, but you also need to ensure there is some alignment exercise happening to bring in those programs that actually address the issues that you want to solve. And then organizations have to go ahead and measure on a continuous basis, probably on a 6 month or 1 year basis, to ensure that are we fixing that problem? Are we able to bridge that gap? Because in general, organizations are supposed to be growing and improving in the skill, whereas you get the minus, you get the 7-year skill gap that's going back to where a company was 7 years before 2020, which is pretty nasty. So in general, this is what we've been noticing across the board. The average we're seeing is anywhere between 4 and 7 years of lost skill for most organizations that we work with, and usually we follow the same methodology. And in most cases, we come in and organizations know they have something, feel they have something, they address it by layoff, they address it by canceling layers, by doing stuff. But the most effective way is to go in and with science, measure, get the facts, choose what you want to fix, align your learning programs, and make sure you're doing continuous learning to address that. And in general, that's been our experience on that front. And that's a big unlocker of productivity.
Simran, we got a question that maybe we should tackle now, and we'll save others for later. But we had a couple of attendees ask about what are a few methods to identify skill gaps besides using like psychometric analysis tools.
Yes. Well, some of it is more basic than that. That's the beauty of it, right? You don't have to go far. If we start with the basic, let's say an organization has been running 360 evaluations or competency assessment evaluations of their leadership for the last 5 years. All you have to do in that case is literally aggregate your results at the higher level and be able to compare overall when it comes to communication, to this, to that. What is the overall rating? How did it change? Now, in general, per studies, there is an expectation of a certain increase on every behavior per year. So in general, you can look at it and see, okay, we dropped by 1 point over 5 over the last 5 years on this point, or the last 2 years, actually, because you want to measure pre-2020 and now. And it will give you exactly where it's lagged. And then you're going to go and start cross-tabulating and saying, okay, can I see what the competency levels were for those managers that left? Can I assess what the competency levels are those that joined? What about those that we've promoted since? So you start getting your cohorts as well, analyze and assess, and you'll be able to know where it is. So that's one way. Some organizations may have not done any 360s before, and now they're struggling with that sense of we have an intuition that tells us there's a leadership, the skill gap in our leadership. Then you can mine your existing data. You're sitting on so much data, as most organizations are, and we're going to talk about that topic in a few minutes, that via machine learning capabilities, via just pure analysis activities that we can do or other organizations can do or your teams can do, you can dig into the existing data. And these could be basically outputs from from your existing data stores, be it an engagement survey that's been run or other sources of data. And then a 360 would be run now, and then the data could be correlated to be able to move forward. So it doesn't have to go too scientific. In general, the data is there, and it's such a low-hanging fruit that it just takes the effort and the exercise to run it or analyze it, aggregate the results, and start looking by cohort or by type of leadership that you lost, that you gained, and be able to decide what you want to fix and how fast do you move that. But the most important thing is this is just to know where you stand. The most important part is how do you go about it, and how do you measure all sources of bridging that skill gap, new program, existing programs, informal programs, and seeing which ones are working the best, because organizations need to really move fast and double down on the channels or areas of improving the gap or bridging the gap as fast as you can, so that you can catch up to the lost times.
Okay, so go ahead.
Go ahead, please. No, I was saying that's, I think that was the only relevant question to that topic, correct?
Yes, for right now. Yep.
Thank you.
We encourage you to keep asking questions. We'll either handle them as we go, or toward the end, we're going to have time at the end. And keep your comments coming, and we'll also talk about those as well. So moving on, we talked about, measuring skill gaps and kind of data that's good to use. And what we find is that organizations spend a lot of time collecting data, put a lot of effort into it, but not necessarily getting what they need out of it. So here, obviously, engagement surveys are at the top of the list. And one of the questioners and the commenters mentioned other types of data that they have, including learning feedback and how you can use learning feedback to gain insight into the workforce. 71% of organizations use employee performance evaluations, new hire and onboarding surveys, qualitative interviews. Oh, by the way, somebody asked about what a stay interview is, and I answered the question in the chat, but it's basically qualitative interview with people that are good employees generally, who you want to stay, and you want to get a sense of where they are and how they feel about their job and the organization, and so that you can proactively get a sense of what's working, what might not be working, and what you might need to address. So anyway, there's a lot of different types of data that collect, but oftentimes they're not using that data and listening and understanding what's really being communicated in a way that's helpful. And so let's go back to Samer, and he's going to give us some examples of how that can work better.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, so to start with, because there is a pertinent question also that came out, which is what is an ideal frequency to survey employees? And our theory usually is ask as many times as you are actually able to address the answers that you're getting. Because that's really the rule here. If you want to ask a question a day, it's because you better be ready to solve one problem a day. So the theory behind what we've seen happen in the market over the last few years is that organizations used to run one annual engagement survey. The challenge with it is that it took time to finish, and when it finished, and by the time the results are deployed to line managers, it may have taken 6 months. And by the time the line manager got their feedback or their insights they needed to be able to make a change, it's probably too late. So organizations realize that, we're bringing in more employees, there is faster movement in resources, faster movement in expectations. We're not able to address engagement survey feedback fast enough. So how about move to a quarterly engagement survey model? And then how about we do that on a continuous basis? So one example is some organization that would come on our way that had implemented solutions, and we used to offer, we still do, but like it used to be a big focus, continuous listening platforms. And the challenge they found is they got very exciting at the beginning, but over time, the engagement of employees with these tools eroded. And the question that came our way, which is what is happening there? And our answer is typically, well, you're asking more questions than you're able to answer, to address. So you're trying to focus on speed to getting feedback, not speed to action. So the priority of organizations should be around time to action. So the focus here is how do we make sure that if you have 5,000 line managers, that these 5,000 line managers are getting insights as fast as possible after you do your exercise, your engagement survey, for example, but also ensure that they're also supported in a way to get the feedback that is the action recommendations that they need to do something about it. Because while the feedback literacy may not be very advanced, but also knowing what to do with insights that you get, even if you understand them, is not something you can have at scale. So the real challenge, in our opinion, is more, am I doing something with the feedback that I'm receiving, and how fast am I doing? And am I closing the loop with the people that are giving me the insights? So that's the first challenge, which is frequency of feedback. The second one is the notion of silos and feedback. So as Claude was showing, there's so many types of surveys taking place in organization. I'm going to take a very specific example from a professional services organization that came our way, and they're looking at our machine learning solution. But the main purpose was we're running our onboarding programs, we're bringing in X employees, and we're losing 15% of our employees in the first year. So we've been tasked to figure out what's going on. So we're looking at our onboarding survey, but onboarding surveys are built around onboarding questions, and we're not getting the deep insights that we need to be able to make decisions about it. And our answer was, are you looking at your Glassdoor data? Are you looking at your exit survey comments? Are you looking at your engagement survey comments? Because there may be a lot of references to what you should do better in onboarding that will happen way after an employee has gone through your onboarding programs. And that's the second notion of a lot of HR organizations are looking at their data in a very siloed way. And there are so many cross-connect, and they've always referred to as the uncommon connections of data that could tell bigger story. In general, they become more qualitative in nature, more in the comments, because if I'm doing an onboarding survey, the questions I ask are about onboarding. But that comment box I give you is where employee can actually talk about something else. So that's the second part, which is, are we looking at the data throughout the journey of an employee from hire to retire, even whether I'm informing recruitment or application or exit or whatever part of the employee journey. And the third one refers back to something that Claude was talking about, is the needs and the wants. We all know that we live in a very competitive world today for resources, and scarce as well. And the main premise behind that is that most organizations have been equipped to ask those same 10 questions in your engagement survey or in my exit survey or onboarding survey that we feel are going to give me the insights that I need that will help me better meet the needs of my employees. But then there is that comment box below it. And that comment box is where I tell the employee, now that I got a sense of what I need to meet your needs, can you tell me everything else in that box? So that box becomes gold mine, because that box is where the employee is going to express their expectations. That box is where the employee can express whether they feel included or not, whether they feel engaged or not, whether they're feeling well enough or not, and so on. So anything that fits the realm of the intangible that I have to write about in the way I write and what I say, and the area that allows me the freedom of expression, typically has been overlooked by organizations because it's a nightmare to manage. If you run a 100,000 employee survey and you get 150,000 comments, who's going to be able to sort through 50,000 comments and be able to categorize them in 55,000 different ways? It's an inhumane expectation, but yet it's a gold mine in terms of analysis. So that's the third area where we typically look, when we look at that world of saying, don't go into higher frequency unless if you're able to move to action as fast. Otherwise, survey less and act more. Don't look at data in a silo. The data could inform other areas and can help the overall employee journey. And look at all the data, not just at the things that you think is important, but also that box that allows an employee to do it. And that's going to give you the intangible insights that could be very powerful for employee engagement, employee motivation, and most importantly, to get a measure of employee expectations. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about some kind of just thinking ahead in the employee listening strategy. So what we shared about before was more the pain points, what we're seeing day in, day out, when we provide software solutions, when we provide consultancy services, measurement services, and so on. This is what we've been seeing in our world. And obviously, what's more important is, where can you be a step ahead? And the first thing we're going to look at is that notion of survey less. Now, it is interesting that as a survey organization, we are making the case today to say you need to survey less, ask less, do more. So when we look at the first thing that we're looking at in an ideal world, if we're going to go back to that annual employee survey that was run once a year, and then that annual skill analysis or 360 evaluation that's run maybe once or twice a year, there could be a world where you can actually run one survey a year that could provide meaningful insights to your 5,000 line managers in one shot that allows them to inform experience, inclusion, engagement, and effectiveness in one shot. That's a notion of a cascaded or an annual assessment or diagnostics of organizational and employee health. So basically, what does that mean? You have two choices when you run your annual survey. You can come and say, let me bring my 5,000 line manager and my 50 higher leaders, put them in one room and say, you all have to agree on the same 10 questions to ask, so I can run my annual engagement survey. Now, the good news in that is you're going to get a very uniform approach. Employees give you feedback comes back, and then every single one of those 5,050 people will get diluted insights that don't really help them solve the unique problems they have in their own department, division, or unit. Or you can go in a different approach and say, the organization cares about these 5 things. These are the 5 problems we want to solve. So here are the 5 questions we're going to ask across the board. But we're going to allow our C-suite and our VPs and our managers and director and managers, etc., to each be able to insert questions that matter to them or select from a pool of available questions that matter to them. For the employee, it won't change much. It's still one survey they're completing. But the beauty of that now is that as I provide feedback, not only am I providing feedback to the organization, but also to my manager, to my about my department, about my manager, about my director, to my director, and so on. And what that does now is when that exercise is run, everybody's engaged in it because everybody has skin in the game. Everybody has meaningful insights coming in their way. It's one exercise. And then at the flip side of that, these 5,000 line managers are fed immediately with very meaningful stuff. And instead of having 5 people trying to work on results from your annual survey, you're going to have 5,050 people in one time working in a very organized way to solve that. What that looks like, if you look at it as an image, I always think in terms of a Titanic that can split into 5,000 fast boats at any point. That fosters agility. That's empowerment because you're getting a measure of effectiveness and experience in one shot, and you're giving meaningful insights with recommendation to actions to everybody in the organization hierarchy, so they can actually move in an autonomous way when needed, in an aligned way because it's cascaded and synchronized, and be able to achieve the best of both worlds, of a world where everybody does whatever they want, ad hoc surveys, whoever wants, or a world where we're going to force you to ask the same 10 questions. So that's one example of how efforts can be consolidated in an exercise that is very actionable, that engages, that gives you the insights that you need in that story of people insight, which is convergence of effectiveness experience, and be able to achieve outcomes that are beyond continuous listening, that are beyond, let us ask 500 surveys a year, and so on. So that covers this part, and we're gonna wrap it up with something that takes it a step further. It's back to you.
Sure. So just a little bit of data to take us into the next part. So we've gotten a couple questions about frequency of surveying, but there's also, how frequently is your organization leveraging advanced analytics driven by AI and machine learning to make better people decisions? And this is kind of where we are right now, that basically 62% of the people are not using analytics to analyze the data they have in the various ways we talked about. They're doing this almost never, or rarely. Only 7% of organizations are consistently or always using analytics in a sophisticated way to help them make the kind of people decisions we're talking about. So that's pretty eye-opening. And in the year 2023, for very few organizations to be able to use this kind of sophisticated analytics is really an eye-opener that organizations need to take a good look at, we feel. So what does that mean in terms of really understanding the actions you need to take to make your organizations better? Basically, we gave this statement to our survey respondents, and the statement was: the recommendations generated from our data analysis have provided breakthrough results for our organization and transformed the way we do business. 27% of organizations say they can do that. That's not very many, especially given all the need we've talked about and all this sense of urgency to retain talent and to improve engagement. But it doesn't have to be that way. And Tamer's going to tell us how this can work much, much better.
Absolutely. And that's to wrap it up, right? So we're talking a lot about there's a problem, we need to listen better, we need to ask less, listen more, do more. And the primary thing that we've been very intrigued about in recent history is how many times we've been requested to provide survey solutions to help organizations get feedback when they already had the data. And an example that I will just give you anecdotally is, think a new chief diversity and inclusion officer joins, and they're tasked to figure out if there is, what are the issues and how do we make sure that we go about addressing them. And yes, of course, they can come in and approach Explorance and say, hey, help us, let us work on, setting up a diversity survey or use our solution and apply their own. That's great. Get the feedback, analyze it, and then come up with the results, discuss them, distribute the results, and start making a difference in it. But we're coming and saying, but you already have so much data in Glassdoor and Indeed, your learning and development feedback, your onboarding surveys, or exit surveys, stay surveys, engagement survey, etc., that you've been running for years. We can easily use machine learning technology and be able to dig into that data directly. We can use deep analytics capabilities as well, and be able on the fly to surface all the issues that are working, all the issues that are not working, and everything that is considered problematic that could help a new chief diversity and inclusion officer be able to know exactly what the issue is on arrival, so that the next move they make is how to make a difference rather than let me analyze and see what the situation is. So that's just one example of many. The reality, anytime it comes to know, do we have engagement issues, do we have inclusion issues, what's our employer brand, do we have a skill gap, all these kind of things that most probably organizations are sitting on a treasure chest of data that's already existing. And instead of going and asking your employees one more time about something that added to your data store that obviously wasn't leveraged, otherwise you wouldn't be asking the question again. The philosophy that we bring to the table is there's two ways to get feedback from an employee. The first one is to ask them a question. The second one is to ask the data that question. And if you have the right tools for mining that are typically powered by AI or machine learning or even just general analytics, you may be able to get much more mileage from the data that you have. And what's cool about machine learning, beyond being able to come and telling you the picture of what is it that my employees think is working, not working, what are they feeling good about, bad about, and so on, it actually could get you prescriptive components. So in one shot, I could come and say, what are the 3 things that my employees are telling me to stop doing in order to improve a certain outcome? What are the 3 things they're telling me to continue doing, to do more of, to change? And then imagine that you can take that same capability and deploy it at scale where your 5,000 line managers in 1 day or 2 days are able to get these kind of insights in their hand. And instead of them having to be data literate or feedback literate, all they have to do is just say, just tell me what are the 2 things I have to stop doing, what are the 2 things I have to start doing. And if you just do that times 5,000 line managers, you can completely change the picture of how the organizations run and how effective they get. And most importantly, since we're talking about the motivation, reigniting employee ambition, is really around the notion of being heard being listened and doing things tangibly based on the feedback, because that's the only thing that will start making people feel validated, included, engaged, and then the engine running towards the kind of productivities or outputs that organizations seek. So back to you, Claude.
Great. And so we're kind of finished with the formal part, but we've still got a few minutes for questions. And we've got a couple to start with. And then if anybody has any comments or questions they want to ask, we'll take those as well. The key takeaways today, and just at a high level, or employee listening is more about efficiency than frequency. Listening must produce insights that can lead to decisive strategic action to drive the business forward. And Samer touched on something that I just wanted to underline once again, is once you get the insight, once you get the information, the action doing it in a timely way is really important. I've worked for organizations in the past before I came to Brandon Hall Group that did all these kind of surveys, but they couldn't gain consensus within the organization on what to do. There was back and forth. There's a lot of infighting, honestly, on what they should do to solve the problem. If you're not prepared to take action, asking a lot of survey questions and not doing anything is just going to drive your engagement level down. So you've got to be ready to take the kind of actions that we've been talking about now. And this kind of technology and the process we've been talking about can help you do it, but there needs to be a willingness and an ability and a functionality of the organization to really do something. I think that's another key takeaway. And then, as Samer was just saying, you probably have a lot more data than you think you do that can be converted into these actionable kind of insights. And the key is to try to use it, to pull it together, to understand it, and to take the right actions. So again, I've got a couple of questions to start with, but if anybody has any others, we'll love to take them. Let's see. So the first one is, and I think indirectly, Samer, you were talking about this, but you didn't actually use the words, but what are the advantage or benefits of using sentiment analysis for employee feedback? Will this enable HR teams to take better action on what employees need or want?
Well, obviously, there's a lot of elements that are considered more intangible. And, I look beyond sentiment. When I look at inclusion, you're not going to find a reference to inclusion or burnout in your demographic data. I can go to an HRIS and say, oh, that employee feels included, that employee is going to burn out, and so on. Engagement, there's a lot of components, well-being, and sentiment. How do you feel? In general, these lives in the realm of the intangible. They're usually in the structure of what I tell you as much as they are in the content of what I tell you. And if we can extract these in an analysis, it's a wealth, because most time if you want to predict attrition, it's a combination of an employee getting burned out, they're feeling a high level of stress, they're feeling there's unfairness within. So there's very key components that are predictive in nature, whether it's attrition or other areas as well. So the premise is we always want to look at all the data. I want to look at what I know about you. I want to look at the behavior. I want to look at your sentiment. I want to look at what you're telling me, at what I'm hearing from you, and be able to connect all these dots to tell the most precise story possible, so that when I want to implement something to improve at scale a situation, an organization, I'm actually well informed. So that's an example where this becomes crucial. And like we said, employees, the world has shifted to a very qualitative place. If you want to get Glassdoor data, Indeed data, some organization may go to safe spaces in Slack or wherever. It becomes very important to actually be equipped to be able to capture everything. But I look beyond sentiment. I look at feelings. I look at outputs, whether they're inclusion or things even at a higher level towards attrition risk and so on.
Great, thank you. This is more of a comment from Ali than a question, but I think we're sharing and maybe commenting on Samer. Her sense is that for a solid employee, these annual or semi-annual reviews are rote, kind of check the boxes exercises. And she thinks a concerted, organized method of collecting employee input at various times is more helpful. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the goal here, is saying, let's do less so we can do it right, and do it in a way that's aligned. Many times, if most people don't even agree with the questions being asked or the purpose or the timing of a survey, then they're not on board. They're going to question the data they receive or the insights. So definitely being able to go in and put a lot of forethought and planning to do something right and once, and be able to deploy meaningful actions that are going to make a difference at scale in an agile mindset is absolutely what we're proposing here. We're not saying there's no place for the continuous listening piece. We do provide continuous listening solution. There is a place for them, but most of the strategic movements that organizations should make could come in scenarios that are more organized, where we actually rally people around the notion of make sure that your strategic plan for next year is also derived by that annual measurement of effectiveness and experience, to ensure that by the end of next year, our employees are more effective and they're experiencing something better within our organization. And I see there was a question just before it too about what is the view on using one-on-ones and formal performance reviews.
I was just about to get to that.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So the question is, just so everybody can hear it, what is the view of using one-to-ones and formal performance reviews as good moments for stay conversations and feedback?
Yeah. We usually don't recommend that, because when you're doing anything performance, I don't know how many, I remember, again, I don't know why today the theme is McDonald's for me, but that was my first job. And I remember when my manager was presenting my results, and there were a lot of beautiful recommendations for improvement and development. But there was at the end something, how did you rate and how much raise did you get? And I got the lowest raise possible because I was wearing brown shoes and not black shoes. And that's all I remember, right? So the premise is, when it's a formal performance review, people typically come in a less safe space mindset. So if that's the time to ask people for feedback or having these candid conversations that, we're looking at stay or, whatever it may be, it may not be optimal. Our recommendation is to always separate the feedback you need to hear to be able to improve something versus the feedback you're giving, not even feedback, the rating you're giving someone to actually justify a raise or a promotion. The more they are split apart, the healthier as an exercise it will be, and the more honest information you will get.
Yeah, just to glom onto that, performance reviews, I think the last time we did a survey, which was in early 2022, about the feeling of evaluations of performance, something like 86% of organizations said that what was in the performance reviews were biased or not based on the ongoing performance. So if you use too much of that, or you rely on too much of that, I don't think you're necessarily getting the kind of feedback that you want. One-on-ones that are held maybe on an ongoing basis, assuming that information is captured in a way that can be analyzed, might be helpful if you're having the kind of developmental conversations and career planning conversations, and those kind of things could be helpful. But I agree, I would stay away from performance reviews for fairly obvious reasons. Let's see. We have another question here. We've got just 1 minute to go. I can give you a short answer to this one. What is the best approach when it comes to capability development for managers? Do you think a learning journey once a year is enough to tackling ongoing issues and plan ongoing learning? Is ongoing learning more effective, especially in a VUCA world? And in the short answer, in the probably 40 seconds I have, is once a year learning is definitely not enough. Leadership training, management training needs to be ongoing in a variety of formats, with much more emphasis than is usually done to allow managers to practice and apply the skills they're being taught into real business situations, so that they not only gain more knowledge and capability, but also they know how to apply it in specific situations that they're going to be dealing with. So we're right at the top of the hour. I think this has been great. Samir, thank you so much for sharing your insights. And thank you to everyone. We had a nice crowd today that took an hour out of their busy days. We really appreciate it. Thank you for attending. We'll be following up with the recording and slides within 24 hours. So we appreciate all of you, and we look forward to seeing you on another Brandon Hall Group webinar in the near future. Thank you. Have a great day and a great weekend coming up. Bye-bye, everybody.